All right, so this is where I want to bring in the palette. So I'm going to go File, Place, I'm going to Desktop, and I want to bring in this JPEG. Okay, I want to make it a little bit bigger than this, so I'm going to hit the Shift key. Okay, so the resolution of this video is not very good, so it's very hard to see this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's look at it here, so it's a little bit easier to look at. I'm going to do a split complement from my cyan green. So to find the split complement, I look for the complement of cyan green, which is red magenta, and then I want to pick the colors on either side of that. Now again, I want to pick the colors that are labeled or have the circles on them. So the split complement of cyan green is magenta and red. One of the things that you might want to look at is the formula. So if I look at red, we know that to make red it's 100% yellow and 100% magenta. Magenta is just 100% magenta. Cyan green is 100% cyan and 50% yellow. That's important to remember when we start working. Once you do this enough, you'll remember these. Okay, so let's go back. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of do it in the way that I see it laid out here. So I'm going to have my cyan green up on the upper left, then I'm going to have my magenta on the upper right, and I'm going to have my red at the bottom. So I'm going to select, and then I'm going to go to the eyedropper tool and I'm going to select this. We need to have the color palette open. What should happen is that the CMYK slider should open. And it looks like my monitor is, or this JPEG is a little bit off. So I remember that the formula is 100% cyan and 50% yellow. So I'm going to have to change this pretty radically. And there should be no magenta and there should be no black. Okay, so now that it's most saturated. So let me select the next one. Now I could select this, but I could also go and go, well, I know that that's easy. It's just 100% magenta. So I don't even really have to use the eyedropper tool. And I could do that. I could create these knowing the formulas. So the next one would be red. So I could, I could again select it, but I know that there should be no cyan. It should be 100% yellow and 100% magenta, and no. So there they are. Okay. Now, one of the objectives is going to be to create a broad range of values. So one of the hues needs to be at about 50%, one needs to be at about 90%, and one needs to be at about 10 or 12%. And I can see that these are all very close together. There's another tutorial that shows you how to check for the value. So I'm not going to go through that right now. But I'm just eyeballing this. I can see that they're not close enough, or they're too close together in value. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust these. So I'm going to select the cyan green, and I want to add white to that. And the way we do that, take the slider that is at its closest to 100, hit the shift key, and you can watch this slider. They're all going to slide together, and basically that's lightening the color up. Okay, so I'm going to make it fairly light here. We're eventually going to change the ground, so that'll help. Okay, I'm going to leave the red as it is. I know it's actually a little bit too dark, but for the conversation, we'll just leave it like that. I'm going to select the magenta, and I'm going to add some black to it, and that'll make it pretty dark. I think I am going to raise this up a little bit. So again, I'll hit the shift key, bring it up a little bit. So you notice now none of them are at their prismatic, and there's no requirement for that. They don't have to be at their prismatic. What they do need to have is a broad range of value. Okay, so now what I want to do is see how they overlap. So I'm going to select the red, and then this neutral overlapping, and then the tint of the cyan green. I'm going to go to Edit, Edit Colors, and I'm going to go Blend vertically because they're basically one on top of another. So here it is, there's the average between the two. Okay, let's blend the tint of cyan green, the neutral, and then the shade of magenta. And so I'm going to go Edit, Edit Colors, and I'm going to go Blend horizontally because they're right next to each other. And then I'm going to go ahead and select the red, the neutral, the shade, and I'm going to go Edit, Edit Colors, and then I'm going to go Blend vertically. Okay, now we need to get this one in the middle, and there is a tutorial on how to use the worksheet and do the math. But what we can do is we could blend these two together, and we could get pretty darn close. So I'm going to select this one, the middle, and this one, and I'm going to go Edit, Edit Colors, and I'm going to go blend horizontally. All right, so it's close. It's not absolutely correct. What I could do is now take these two, because this is now going to add some of this in here, and I'm going to go Edit, Edit Colors, and then blend vertically. That, just look at it, that looks pretty good. That looks like that's about an average. And if you select it and you go over here, it kind of makes sense. It looks like there's a very little blue in here, so there's only about 16% blue. There's about 50% magenta, and there's about 30% yellow. That seems just about right. And of course there's going to be a little bit of black because we've have that in this one, which was then incorporated in here. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to create the analogous. And again, the analogous are going to be three colors that are right next to each other that share only two primaries. So I'm going to go ahead and use my my magenta as a starting point, and then I'm going to use the violet and then the red magenta. So I'm going to have red magenta, magenta, and violet. So I'll start, and I'll select the violet, and then again I know that this should be, because I know my formula should be 100% magenta and should be 50% cyan, and there should be no yellow in it at all. Okay, so there it is at its most saturated. Now let me pick the next one here. So I'm going to now make this one the magenta, and again I could select this, but like I said, it's easy. Just we know it's 100% magenta and 0, 0, and 0. All right, and then let's pick the last one, which is going to be our red. Again, I could, it's the magenta, so it would be this one would be 100% magenta and 50% yellow. And then there should be no black. Okay, so there it is. Now look at these. They're all, these two especially, are very close together, and this is pretty dark. Again, I think the way to do this is to take the one that's the darkest and add black to it, take the one that's lightest and add white to it. So this one is a little bit lighter than the red. So I'm going to go ahead and select the violet. I'm going to add black to it. Quite a bit, that's too much. I want to make sure that it reads as violet. I'm going to add a lot of white, so I'm going to hit the Shift key. And then this one, I better lighten this up a little bit. It's a little too dark. Okay, so now I'm going to blend them together. So, okay, that looks pretty good. You know, I could go back and, you know, think about, well, maybe I need to get them a little bit further apart, but that's pretty good. The one thing that we need to do is we need to give this a ground. We don't want to see it on white. So the best thing to do is to make a neutral ground, and you're going to do this in your studies, you know, I would probably pick either this chromatic gray or this chromatic gray. I could pick this chromatic gray, but I would pick a chromatic gray and let's use that for the ground. So if I select this chromatic gray that's now in the palette, I'm going to go to the shape tool again. I'm going to go to the rectangle tool and I'm going to basically draw a rectangle over the whole object here. Then I'm going to go Object, Arrange, Send to Back. All right. Now that still looks kind of saturated to me. What I'm going to do is we're going to use another tool here. If we go to the color palette, we go up to these little bars here. We're going to go and we're going to change this to HSB. One thing I forgot to say is if you bring in the color palette and you don't see the sliders, click on this and go Show Options, and then it brings the bars in there. One of the other sliders that's going to be very useful as we move forward is this one called HSB. And HSB stands for Hue, Saturation, and Brightness, which is also value. So we have hue, saturation, and value. We don't want to change the hue. We don't really want to change the brightness, but what we might want to do, still pretty saturated. Look at that. So let's take the slider bar. Look at this. If we slide it all the way over, it goes to a neutral gray. So we don't want it that much, but you know. So it retains the basic hue. It's desaturated it, and it's actually lightened it a little bit. If I wanted to, I could darken it by adding a little bit of black into it. That's what the brightness does. All I want is something that's going to be fairly neutral and show these well. So if I like that, then I'm ready to save it. You could either type the text in here. It may be easier just to type the text in your journal. We want to know that this is your split complement and then this is your analogous. What would be really great is to say it's a split complement, but this is using a tint of cyan green, a shade of magenta, and a slight tint of red. That would be very useful. Okay, so to save it, what we want to do is we want to go to the Artboard tool, select it, and then we're going to go File, Export, and we're going to go Save for Web Legacy because we're just going to post it onto Blackboard. And again, it compresses it, so it's down to a good size. It's under 1200. That's great. Make sure that if it's not checked, go to JPEG High, and then you're good, and just go Save, and then give it your name. I'm going to call it Color Palette 1, and then save it to the desktop. Save, and you're done. And then from there you can upload it to your Blackboard journal. That's it.